America decides, and so does Florida. In Florida, the race to replace Governor Ron DeSantis is now down to Republican Byron Donalds and Democrat David Jolly. They're going to face off in November for a chance to lead the nation's third most populous state. Listen.
Tonight, we put aside our differences. Tonight, we are one united Republican Party.
To my Democratic friends, thank you for this opportunity. The values that hold us together are big enough to build a coalition tonight to win the governorship in November.
All right, in a major upset, Florida Democratic Socialist Angie Nixon beat out more moderate Alex Vindman, you know that name, in her sprint to take a U.S. Senate seat. Vindman, an NSA whistleblower and well-known Trump critic. Well, earlier today on CBS Mornings, we asked Nixon about the challenges she faces running as a member of the Democratic Socialist wing in the general election.
It's not necessarily a socialist message or a progressive message. It's not about labels. It's actually just about the needs of people. And people want the same things, as I stated earlier, to be healthy, prosperous, and safe. And they want to make sure that people are looking out for these rights that they deserve, which are health care, which are housing, which are voting rights. And it's actually resonating, and they're supportive of them.
So live to CBS News political reporter Zach Hudak. So Zach, okay, Nixon in queue now, but how does she do in the general election?
Reed, she has an uphill battle from here on out. It is always difficult if you are, whether a Republican or a Democrat, if you're the candidate who is more on the fringe in a primary and you win, it's always going to be more difficult when you move into that general election because you have to win over some of those independents, some of those people even maybe from the opposing party. So in her case, she has that going against her to begin with. She needs to pitch the people who have been voting for Alex Vindman that they need to come over to her. But this is also happening, Reed, in Florida, a state that really for a decade has been getting more and more conservative. It's a place where the governor is a Republican, where the state house is Republican, where the state senate is Republican. It's also a place where if you go into the south of Florida, there's a lot of second-generation folks from places like Cuba, and they have a major aversion to socialism. So she's running openly as a Democratic socialist. She's going to have really some difficulties in southern Florida. So there's a lot working against her as she moves into this general election. The real question is, can she build on this momentum she has in the progressive wing of the party and win over some of those moderates and maybe even win over a few Republicans as partially an indictment of President Trump?
Okay, so let's stay in Florida and now focus in on their House races. Trump-backed Republican Congressman Corey Mills lost. Is that seen as a sign that perhaps a Trump-backed candidate does not have the headwinds?
Reed, I think really that was more a question of candidate quality than of President Trump's endorsement not meaning what it used to. We saw Byron Donalds have a landslide victory in his race there, and he is a close Trump ally. I think in this case that Corey Mills has some scandals that he's been dealing with. He has a House ethics investigation and a DOJ investigation. He's been accused of sexual misconduct, so he's had a lot working against him, and even some Republican members of Congress have come out against him and supported his opponents. So I think this is more an instance of candidate quality still matters, and President Trump, his endorsement is still important and carries a lot of weight, but it is not the end-all be-all. It cannot overcome major issues with a candidate.
Well, speaking of Trump endorsements, let's talk about the governor's race there. A Trump-backed Republican goes up against a former Republican, now turned Democrat. How is the sale to voters going to be where that's concerned?
I think the question there, Reed, is really it becomes a question of do we continue as Florida with the DeSantis, pretty MAGA-oriented state government, or should it be more of a complete redirection? Dave Jolly, the Democratic nominee, is someone who served in the U.S. Congress as a Republican. In 2017, when he retired from Congress, he came out as one of the most vocal former Republicans against President Trump. So he's someone who clearly thinks the Republican Party has gone in the wrong direction. Byron Donalds, on the other hand, is one of the biggest young rising stars in the MAGA movement. He is talked about as a potential 2032 presidential candidate. So this really comes down to, does Florida want to continue to be moving in the direction of President Trump and the MAGA movement, or do they want to realign a bit and move back, maybe still remain a redder state, but move to a more moderate Republican state? And that's the question that's going to be before these voters come November.
Fascinating to watch Florida, as always, in politics. Thank you so much, Zach Hudak. Have a great day. CBS News Executive Director of Elections and Surveys, Anthony Salvanto, now on key takeaways of last night's primary elections in Alaska and also in Florida.
Some takeaways from last night's primaries. Let's start up in Alaska, because that could be a race we're still talking about in November when it comes to deciding which party gets Senate control. Now, Alaska has been a reliably Republican state. Incumbent Dan Sullivan is running Republican. The president won it by double digits. But at the same time, the Democrats feel they have a good challenger in Mary Peltola. She's won statewide office before. And in Alaska's ranked choice voting system, someone who doesn't get 50% initially could still go over the top as the second and third choice. That dynamic should be interesting to watch. Then down in Florida, well, that's a reliably Republican state too of late, and that's the way we'll start looking at both the Senate and the governor's side. But what's notable is that Florida redrew its congressional district lines and set up the Republicans to potentially pick up 3 or 4 more congressional seats out of the state. That could, of course, be a big help for their chances at holding on to control of the House. And in particular, we did see on the Democratic Senate side an upset victory for Angie Nixon. Now, what's important there is the larger context, because the Democratic Party, through its candidates in the primaries, is essentially having a debate about what kind of economic message they're going to offer. On one hand, you see just over half of Democrats with a positive view of the label, at least, Democratic Socialist. On the other hand, you have the wider electorate having a net negative view of the label socialism. Certainly an interesting item to watch as we head into the general.